Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 258. I'm the host, Kyle Anzalone. On today's show, I'm talking about the war in Ukraine. So, share the show. It's hosted at the Libertarian Institute, and right now at the Institute, we're holding our spring fundraiser. So, if you'd like to head on over to the Institute and support quality journalism that isn't funded by the military industrial complex, it's now a whole bunch of former spoots and congressmen who are turned lobbyists just telling you how you're supposed to feel about the situation in Ukraine and how every respectable American feels. We break it down. We bring you hard news at the Institute. That's what I try to do here on this show at Conflicts of Interest, and also all the writing that I do at the Institute. We have a lot of great stuff going on at the Institute. Listeners of my show are very familiar with Connor Freeman, who has a brand new article out today. Patrick McFarlane, frequent guest of the show, has another new article out this week as well. Me and Will Porter are in the news section almost every day at the site. We have something new up there, but definitely Monday through Friday, you could go to the site every morning and find brand new articles covering the most important news from a libertarian perspective. With several articles a day, we had well over 50 published at the Institute in the last month of March alone, and we're already probably going to beat that in April. So a lot of great stuff happening at the Institute, and we could continue to do it and continue to grow with your support. So head on over to libertarianinstitute.org/donate. There's a great list of kit bats there too. So you're going to help the Institute, but you're also going to get something cool in return, like a Libertarian Institute book, an audio book, a gift bag, or something like that. So libertarianinstitute.org/donate. Just want to remind people too, they can find the video version of the show on YouTube, Rumble, and Odysee. We repost the show on the blog at antiwar.com, and you can find the show on Facebook or our Twitter handle at con_interest. I'm at Kyle Anzalone_ on Twitter. Last up, the sponsor of the show is Paloma Verde, PalomaVerdeCBD.com. Promo code PEACE. When you use that promo code and spend $75 or more, the show gets a kickback. And so you get a discount, but also the show gets a little bit of financial help from that too. Now, they have a great selection of products at Paloma Verde. My favorite thing about the Paloma Verde products is you can always count on them to be high quality. Everything I've gotten from Paloma Verde has tasted great and has worked as expected. So Paloma Verde CBD.com, promo code PEACE. Help yourself out and help your favorite podcast. All right, now let's get into the news. All right, I want to start off on today's show by talking about the allegations of war crimes committed in a town, a Ukrainian town outside of Kiev, the capital city, and that is Bucha, Bucha. And I wrote this up for antiwar.com on April 3rd. Ukraine accuses Russia of committing atrocities near Kiev. Moscow calls for a UN investigation. Ukraine has accused Russia of carrying out a deliberate massacre in Bucha, a town near Kiev. Moscow denies the allegations and calls for an investigation led by the UN. The Ukrainian Defense Ministry published several photos and videos alleging to show the aftermath of crimes committed by Russian forces. The Washington Post claims to have verified a video showing 9 dead bodies, including a child. The Times, this isn't the New York Times, this is the Times of London, I believe, published an account by a member of Ukrainian Territory Force, Sergei Torvarok, and he said, "We found 18 bodies in there. They had been tortured. They have been torturing people. Some of them had their ears cut off. Others had their teeth pulled out. There were kids like 14, 16 years old, some adults. They just took the bodies away yesterday." And so those are, some of the reports we're getting on the allegations led by, again, Ukraine and then the Western press. And now let's get into like some of the reason that there is again, this isn't meant to lay out and say that, oh, Russia didn't do this and it was just the Ukrainian Nazis that came in and tortured and killed people. Not saying that. I'm saying I don't know what happened, and I'm also saying the US mainstream media doesn't either. And so this is what we do know about the situation. Ukraine first levied the allegations against Russia days after Russian forces withdrew from the area. Bucha mayor Anthony Fedoruk confirmed to the media that Russian troops had exited the area on March 31st. Russia has responded by denying the charges and highlighting the mayor's statement. Moreover, on March 31st, the mayor of Bucha confirmed in his video address that there were no Russian military in the town, but did not even mention any local residents laying shot in the streets with their hands tied. And now, Joe Loria makes this point in his article on Consortium News, which is very good on the page today at antiwar.com, that it's not impossible that when the mayor was giving his address, he was just unaware that atrocities have been committed. If you look at the one account he's saying it's happened in a basement, maybe the mayor doesn't know about that, but the bodies laying in the street, it does seem a little bit odd that the mayor wouldn't have been informed of that, because I don't speak Ukrainian, and the mayor, but he sounded almost jubilant in his, the tone of his speech, like, they had defeated and drove out the Russian forces, which, kind of made sense right after the Russian forces leave. I'm not trying to, suggest that he was up to anything nefarious at all. I'm just saying it seems odd that he wouldn't have maybe given a more somber address if there had been these atrocities committed. Now, possible he didn't know about it, and it's also possible that this is maybe just one clip and we're not seeing the clip maybe from the same day, but this time there is no evidence prior to Sunday, which would have been, I think, the second or third, I guess the third, that there had been any atrocities committed. And so now Russia is saying that the massacres happened after Russian forces has exited the area, and this is the statement from the Russian Defense Ministry. It's particularly concerning that all the bodies of people whose images were published by the Kiev regime after the last 4 days have not stiffened, nor do they have the characteristic cadaver spots and have fresh blood in their wounds. And so from the pictures, I would say it's more hard to tell. I think the Russian statement is a little more definitive than that, maybe. However, if these people were killed on March 31st or before, you would have expected, I guess, the blood to look a little bit less fresh. Now, there could be all kinds of reasons for this. I'm not trying to just promote, what Russia is saying here, but I do think there is maybe a little bit of truth to that, but there could be environmental factors that we just don't know about yet that account for the bodies not looking like they were dead for over 3 days. I think it would have been like at least 72 hours by the time the photos were published. After Russian forces exited the city, some members of the Azov battalion were photographed by a photographer for the New York Times in Bucha. Azov is an extremist neo-Nazi militia incorporated into Ukraine's military. While the photos and videos published by Ukraine appear to show war crimes, it is unclear who committed the offenses and when. Several Western countries have responded by immediately condemning Russia. Moscow has called for an international investigation carried out by the UN. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres separately called for his organization to carry out a probe into the alleged allegations. It is essential that an independent investigation leads to effective accountability, he said. So that's kind of the situation where you do seemingly at this point have Russia in line with the UN Secretary General on this. And so maybe an investigation will happen. Now, who knows what it will show? Some, would suggest that, pushing the investigation by Moscow means that Russia is unlikely responsible for this. However, Russia could be planning to only allow an investigation to pass the UN Security Council if it is sufficiently controlled by Russia, in that it'll find what they want. And so, they feel pretty confident that this is a bluff that they can make, because no actual investigation is likely to happen that has any power to actually figure out what happened here. Or it could be that Russia really is saying, like, look, hands up, it wasn't us, and you could go in and check all that out, and it's going to become clear that those bodies, those people were killed after the Russian forces left. Now, the faster that happens, the better. Of course, another problem, is you have no chain of custody here at all, no potential for a third party to really come in quickly enough, I think, to carry out the kind of investigation needed, as we saw in Duma, Syria, where, by the time the teams actually come in, it gets harder to tell exactly when people died the further out that you get. And so, we are looking at just a number of hours here. Maybe it would have been an easy call 24 hours after the bodies were discovered, but now if it takes another 2 or 3 weeks, that is going to get increasingly difficult, and who knows how fast the UN would possibly act on this. Now, I think this is going to be a very substantial event. In the hours after this, on Sunday, hours after this was initially released and it was being discussed in the corporate press, there was a substantial Wikipedia page already published on this event, and essentially pointing all the fingers at Russia. Now, the hundreds of bodies, I'm not sure about that. If we look at like some of the videos and some of the claims that have been published by the Western press, it seems like that number could be in the scores of people that are dead rather than in the hundreds. So 40, 50, 60, it could be higher. I'm not trying to say that, but it's being described as in the hundreds, and I'm not sure that's actually accurate, no matter who killed them, right? It could have been that the Azov battalion came in and only killed 60 people, and it actually wasn't the hundreds of people that the Ukrainian government is putting out. So lots of questions still remain on this event, but I do think it's going to be a major topic for the months to come, and who knows, years. It could be, we still talk about Duma, and there's still information coming out on that event that makes it clear that the Western nations responded too quickly on bad information put out by extremist tied groups within the Syrian resistance to Bashar al-Assad that caused the U.S. to carry out airstrikes on Syrian targets when it was completely unnecessary, because Assad didn't carry out a chemical weapons attack. And as confirmed by Will Porter in some very important journalism on that strike that no one almost ever brings up, the U.S. targeted sites that were cleared by the OPCW in the weeks leading up to the strike. So they knew there was nothing there. They were just bombing facilities to do it, to make Trump look tough. And so I think that that's a part of the fear here, is that as you build these kind of narratives that, oh man, the Russians are committing atrocities here, there, and everywhere else, it's going to increasingly put pressure on Biden to act. And, Biden is already saying ridiculous things about Bucha, just like he did on anything else that Putin has done, calling him a war criminal and calling him to face charges and things like that. But we have Dave DeCamp writing here on April 4th on the U.S. response. The article is titled, Biden U.S. allies vow to ramp up pressure on Moscow over alleged Russian killings in Bucha. And he says, President Biden told reporters on Monday that he is planning more sanctions on Russia and called for Russian President Vladimir Putin to be put on trial for war crimes. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan and the International Criminal Court said the International Criminal Court could be a potential venue for a trial, although the U.S. has a contentious relationship with the court and is not a party to the ICC. The Trump administration sanctioned ICC officials for their probe into war crimes in Afghanistan. The sanctions were lifted by the Biden administration, but Biden officials have criticized the ICC for opening an investigation into Israel's occupation and its war in Gaza. Germany and France have both announced on Monday that they were expelling dozens of Russian diplomats over the alleged Russian massacre. Previously, Berlin and Paris have been more hesitant than other NATO countries to take harder actions against Moscow. French President Emmanuel Macron is now calling for harsher sanctions that target Russian oil. While the details of what happened in Bucha, a suburb near Kiev, are not confirmed, Biden accused Putin of being responsible for the killings, saying, "I got criticized for calling Putin a war criminal. You saw what happened in Bucha. This warrants him. He is a war criminal," he said. Also on Monday, a senior Pentagon official told reporters that the U.S. military was in no position to confirm or refute Ukrainian claims. This is from John Kirby. The Pentagon can't independently, single-handedly confirm that, but we're not in any position to refute the claims. And so this is absolutely absurd. This is not in any way how you investigate crimes or look into allegations. You don't say, well, one very interested party in this and potentially guilty party in this is accusing the other party of being guilty. And since we don't have any direct evidence to refute the Ukrainian claims, we're just going to repeat them as truth. That is absolutely an absurd standard for a government to adopt, and extremely dangerous. It gives Kiev so much power over U.S. policy if we're not going to refute what they're saying. And I think this is particularly concerning that we're hearing this from the Pentagon spokesperson John Kirby over, say, somebody from the State Department who has been far more aggressive and more willing to just accept the claims from Kiev, whereas the Pentagon, I think, has actually pushed back just a little bit. So although I do think Kirby is fully on board with the White House, and my understanding is he's reported as a front runner to replace White House Press Secretary John Psaki. I don't know. I don't want to say he is the front runner. I think the deputy, who's given a couple press conferences now, is maybe the top choice, but Kirby is apparently reported to be up there. And so that is, part of the Western response. There's going to be more and more details to come on that, but very concerning. The expelling of diplomats, of course, happened after the Sergal poisoning in the Salisbury, UK, and this led to a major expulsion of Russian diplomats and helped to deteriorate ties between the Western Russia. I think we're seeing like hundreds of Russian diplomats being expelled from European nations at this point. Now, a couple other stories on the actual fighting in Ukraine and the situation on the ground. Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com on April 1st. Russian forces withdrawing from Ukraine's northern Chernihiv region, and this is an area that's north of the capital of Kiev, and then this is also areas around Kiev where some Russian forces have withdrawn, and this is including Bucha, which we have been talking about. Now, there was this incident where a Russian fuel depot was hit. And Dave DeCamp has this up at antiwar.com. Moscow says Ukraine attacked fuel depot inside Russia. Kiev denies responsibility. Russia said Friday that Ukraine bombed a fuel depot in the Russian city of Belgorod, but Ukrainian officials are denying the claim. Russia's defense ministry said 2 Ukrainian helicopters flying at low altitude attacked the facility, which is about 22 miles from the border with Ukraine. Video has surfaced of what appears to be helicopters attacking the depot and other video showing firefighters putting out the blaze. The head of Ukraine's Security Council said Kiev was not responsible for the attack and said, for some reason, they say we did it, but according to our information, this does not correspond with the reality. Earlier in the day, Ukraine's foreign minister said he couldn't confirm or deny the Russian claim, and then Russian authorities say that 6 people said that 6 of the 24 fuel tanks at the facility and that the blaze had been extinguished. The spokesperson for the Kremlin said Russia is taking steps to ensure that the fires didn't disrupt energy supplies in Belgorod. The The alleged attack came at the same day that Russia and Ukraine resumed negotiations via video link. On Tuesday, Russian officials met in person in Istanbul, and Ukraine put forward a draft peace deal that Russia said it would review and respond to. And so it does seem that this facility was destroyed. I did see some reports from Ukrainian officials saying, oh, maybe it's disgruntled Russian soldiers, but it seems most likely that Ukraine was behind this. All right, let's talk about the Biolabs, and Dave DeCamp has this at antiwar.com. Pentagon says there is no offensive bioweapons at U.S.-linked Ukrainian labs. A Pentagon official told Congress on Friday that there are no offensive biological weapons in any of the dozens of U.S.-linked labs in Ukraine. I can say to you unequivocally that there are no offensive biological weapons in the Ukrainian laboratories that the United States have been involved with, said Deborah Rosenbaum, the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Nuclear, Chemical, and Biological Defense Programs. The Pentagon funds labs in Ukraine through its Defense Threat Reduction Agency. According to a Pentagon fact sheet released last month, since 2005, the U.S. has invested $200 million in supporting 46 Ukrainian laboratories, both health facilities and diagnostic sites. Moscow has accused Ukraine through its defense threat Moscow has accused Ukraine of conducting an emergency cleanup of a secret Pentagon-funded biological weapons program when Russia invaded. The World Health Organization said it advised Ukraine to destroy high-threat pathogens around the time of the invasion. For their part, the U.S. maintains the programs in Ukraine and the former Soviet states is meant to reduce the threat of biological weapons left over from the Soviet Union. While downplaying the threat of the labs, Pentagon officials have also warned they could still contain Soviet-era bioweapons. Robert Pope, the director of DTRA's Cooperative Threat Reduction Program, told the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists in February that the labs might contain Soviet bioweapons and warned that the fighting in Ukraine could lead to a release of a dangerous pathogen. The Biden administration has tried to portray any concerns about the labs as Russian propaganda. When the issue first gained media attention, Biden officials accused Moscow of planning to use chemical or biological weapons, but the U.S. hasn't presented any evidence to back up its claims. And so we're, still just getting more information on this. And here's the thing, that this is kind of in the realm of what I thought the U.S.'s official statement would be, is that these were not offensive weapons. These are only defensive weapons. So they develop biological weapons, but then they say it's only to learn how to defend against them. Now, obviously, you could see how if Russia was doing that and saying that, we're just developing anthrax to figure out how to cure it, we might scratch our head and think maybe not. All right, now on to some news going on outside of Ukraine and geopolitics and things like that. This from myself and Will Porter on April 2nd at the Libertarian Institute. Zielinski says Biden dragging feet on military assistance as U.S. pledges $300 million in lethal aid. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky blasted the U.S. and other Western allies for playing games with weapon transfers to his country, questioning the motives of Kiev's foreign benefactors while pleading for additional support. During a Friday interview with Fox News' Brett Baer, Zelensky said some promised arms deliveries have been delayed, suggesting Ukrainians may soon grow skeptical about the intentions of their American and European partners. And this is from Zelensky. I believe that the United States, the people of the United States, want the weapons shipments. But if this process gets longer, continues to be delayed, then the people will begin to ask questions. Is this really true? Maybe there is some game behind it. I don't want to believe that some of our partners are playing games. And so this is, Zelensky, I think, taking a real shot at Western countries. saying, look, you're promising all these weapons and it's great, but the weapons aren't coming through. Now, maybe the weapons are coming through and Zelensky's looking for more and looking to put more political pressure on Ukraine, but it also could be maybe a sense that Zelensky is kind of waking up to what the rub is in Ukraine, that we're really not concerned about the lives of the Ukrainian people. We want the Ukrainians to keep fighting so they keep killing Russians. Now, I don't think the Biden administration particularly wants the Ukrainian people to die fighting Russians, but that is a consequence of it, and it really doesn't matter to them. And so I don't know. Maybe there was some indication here Zelensky was waking up to that, or maybe it was his just latest effort to get fighter jets, as me and Will continue to write here. The Ukrainian leader went on to slam some countries for offering bulletproof vests or some special brand helmets instead of pleading for heavy weaponry from Washington, including fighter jets. And it's interesting that he noted the helmets, because this is something that was offered by Germany prior to the Russian invasion, and Kiev was pretty upset and everything about it, saying that it's just like kind of a token thing and you really don't want to support us. However, since Germany has pledged a lot of weapons to Ukraine, and so the fact that Zelensky is saying this is quite shocking. And maybe, I guess, as we've talked about on the show, there may be logistical problems getting the weapons into Ukraine, or the other one that I really haven't discussed, but they really don't intend to follow through with all these shipments that they're announcing. And they're buying the weapons, and maybe they're like getting to Poland and staying there and just gonna end up at the Polish government. I'm not sure, but this is what Zelensky says. Just give us missiles, give us airplanes. If you cannot give us F-18s or F-19s or whatever you have, give us some of the old Soviet planes. That's all. Give them into my hands. Give me something to defend my country with, my state. And look, he is saying that we need the fighter jets to defend our state. The Javelin missiles and everything, maybe Zelensky is realizing are just insurgency weapons, that those are not actually going to liberate Ukraine. They're not going to fight off the Russian military. They're going to kill Russians, but a lot of Ukrainians are going to die in the process, and a lot of Ukraine is going to be destroyed in the process. Again, I don't know if Zelensky is coming to that realization, but it does seem that he is growing frustrated with the status quo that ensures that he is not getting everything, getting the weapons like from the West in a way that would combat Russia and actually drive the Russians out of Ukraine in the short term, like in a military sense, not through an insurgency. And this is deliberately what Zbigniew Brzezinski said in 2014, like, don't give them those weapons. You want to give them insurgency weapons, so Russia is fighting street to street in Ukraine, that this will deal Russia a major blow. This is I think the consensus in Washington. I'm not sure exactly what the conversations are inside the White House, but I have speculated for months that I was very concerned that the people inside the White House were very content with this option, that they would be more than willing to have Ukraine fight an insert. They're not willing to go to war with Russia. They're not willing to provide any major weaponry to Ukraine, but they are willing to provide enough weaponry into Ukraine to ensure that the willing Ukrainians will continue to fight and everybody else will be caught up in the crossfire. So we go on here saying that Zelensky has seemed to tailor a lot of his messages around the world to what the people there are going to want. Like in US he's talking about 9/11, in Australia he's talking about MH17, things like this. And this time it seemed that his message was kind of directing that Biden hasn't been tough enough on Russia. And so it's unclear maybe if Zelensky got this response or not, but within hours of Zelensky's comments, however, Washington approved another $300 million in lethal aid for Ukraine, including drones, laser-guided rocket systems, ammunition, armored vehicles, among other gear. In announcing the move, the Pentagon boasted that the U.S. had provided $1.6 billion in military assistance to Kiev since Russia attacked on February 24th, and a massive $2.3 billion since Biden took office in 2021. While it remains unclear what weapons are actually making it to Ukraine, the Western nations are also announced rounds of military aid this week, with Australia promising to deliver Bushmaster armored vehicle. The UK is leading a group of allies to donate long-range artillery, in addition to the multi-million-dollar package from the White House on Friday. And so much aid is just pouring into Ukraine. And yet Zelensky, in some ways, is understandably complaining, but he really doesn't seem to understand the game and what it is. And so he's, pleading for more weapons. All he's going to get is more of these insurgency weapons, though. All right. Next, we have the U.S. Announcing that it would be sending some Soviet-era tanks to Ukraine. This from Date to Camp on April 1st. A U.S. official told the New York Times on Friday that the Biden administration will work with allies in Europe to send Soviet-made tanks to Ukraine as Western nations push to pour weapons into the country. The move marks an escalation in Western military aid to Ukraine. Until now, the U.S. and NATO allies have provided Ukraine with thousands of soldier-fired anti-tank and anti-aircraft missiles, but have held off sending more advanced weapons over concern of provoking Russia. The U.S. officials won't specify how many tanks will be sent or what countries they will come from. Ukraine needs Soviet-made weapons since its armed forces are trained to use them, and the only NATO members that have are the former Soviet states that can provide them. The decision came after Ukrainian President Zielinski pleaded with NATO to send more tanks and warplanes. The U.S. has previously backed off a plan to send Soviet-designed MiG-29 fighters jets to Ukraine, and they talked about these going from Poland. There are still talks about sending at least parts from the S-300 systems to Ukraine. That would be from Slovakia, or the S-300 interceptor missiles. Maybe the Ukrainians still have some launchers that work and they just need the missiles. It's unclear what that situation is at this time. But yep, more weapons heading to Ukraine. Next article is from Will Porter at the Libertarian Institute, writing on April 2nd. U.S. calls off ICBM tests, citing Russia tensions. And this is maybe just a little bit of good news here, that they are being just a little bit cautious. And that means they, to some extent, understand the nuclear threat that they are playing with. Will writes, the U.S. Air Force has canceled a planned test for the Minuteman III intercontinental ballistic missile, with the Pentagon stating the decision was made out of an abundance of caution amid soaring tensions with Russia following an attack on Ukraine. Initially planned for March, the missile drill was postponed after Moscow ordered its nuclear forces on higher alert status due to what Russian President Vladimir Putin deemed aggressive statements from the NATO alliance. On Friday, however, the military confirmed that the tests had been scrapped entirely. Reached by Reuters, Air Force spokesperson An Stefanitz said the decision would not affect the readiness of the strategic forces of the United States. In announcing the initial delay last month, Pentagon press spokesperson John Kirby said Washington wanted to avoid any actions that could be misunderstood or misconstrued by Russia. And so, good that they have canceled this test just to avoid any possible mistakes or miscalculations. But, this doesn't in any way change really the balance of the nuclear status, or cause the U.S. to really fundamentally reconsider pouring massive amounts of money into ICBMs, which they have in the 2023 budget they've proposed. All right. Next article is from myself and Will Porter. This was published today at the Libertarian Institute. Finland considering NATO membership after Russia warns of serious consequences. Finland is mulling whether to join the NATO military alliance, Prime Minister Sanna Marin said, noting that a decision could come by next spring, citing a new security environment in Europe following Russia's attack on Ukraine. Speaking to fellow members of the ruling Social Democrat Party over the weekend, the PM said Moscow's ongoing invasion is a flagrant violation of international law, arguing that Russia is not the neighbor we thought it was. She added that this has prompted the government to rethink its long-standing policy of neutrality towards the NATO bloc. In this new situation and changing security environment, we will have to evaluate all the means to guarantee the safety of Finland and Finns, Martin said. We'll have to seriously mull over our stance and approach to military alignment. We will have to do this carefully but quickly, effectively during the course of this spring. Marin previously stated that NATO membership would be very unlikely, but has changed her tune, now saying that an assault on Ukraine has altered relations with Russia in an irreversible way. While Finland maintains a strict stance of non-alignment throughout the Cold War, refusing to enter NATO, as well as the Soviet-led Warsaw Pact, recent polling indicates that Finns are increasingly favorable to membership in NATO. A survey conducted in February shows a majority of respondents would bet the idea, up from just 19% in 2017, dubbed a historic shift by former Prime Minister Alex Stubb. Opinion leaders opposition leaders such as Petteri Orpo, who heads up the National Coalition Party, has publicly supported NATO membership for Finland, arguing that this is not only necessary for the country's defense, but it would mean that it has fully joined the West. And he says, in order to improve our security guarantee and our independence, we should join NATO. We still have a powerful and aggressive neighbor. For me, NATO membership is not just about pros and cons. It's a bigger question of identity. We are a Western country. In this sense, our place is in NATO. However, some in the government have objected to the idea, with one senior official telling the Financial Times that the move may be seen as dangerous and provocative by Russia. Applying for membership carries awful risk for Finland and for NATO. I have always said that joining military alliances is something you should do in quiet time so that you do not import any instability into the organization you join. In comments to CNN on Sunday, NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg said that both Finland and Sweden would be very much welcomed by all 30 allies, even suggesting that membership could be fast-tracked. And this is important because there was I believe the member of the Finnish opposition party said that, one of the dangerous times is if you apply for membership and then it takes a while for you to join. That's the status that Ukraine was in when Russia attacked. Now, it's obviously not a one-to-one on Finland and Ukraine, but he does kind of, bring up an interesting point there. And I think he maybe misses the larger point that once you join NATO, it is going to put you a little bit more in the crosshairs of Moscow, as NATO is a hostile military alliance that you are now a part of. And so I don't think that'll be alleviated once Finland joins NATO, although it would change the calculus for a Russian invasion. And so this is from the Russian foreign ministry. It's obvious that if Finland and Sweden join NATO, it is a military organization to begin with. There will be serious military and political consequences. It would require changing the whole palette of relations with these countries and require regulatory measures. And so that is the response from Russia. And of course, if this moves forward, I expect Russia will make more threats. This from Will Porter yesterday at the Libertarian Institute, very significant. Poland says the U.S. should deploy nuclear weapons to its territory. Will writes, Polish Deputy Prime Minister has called for the United States to station nuclear weapons in his country, arguing they would act as a deterrent against Russia, while urging the NATO alliance to significantly boost its presence across Eastern Europe. A strong critic of Moscow, who's repeatedly called for direct military action amid Russian attack on Ukraine. The deputy prime minister suggested that American bombs could be deployed to Poland during an interview with German newspaper DW on Sunday. Basically, it just made sense to expand nuclear sharing to NATO's eastern flank, he said. If the Americans asked us to store U.S. nuclear weapons in Poland, we would be open to that. It would be a significantly increased deterrence towards Moscow. He also mentioned that and to call for a large operational NATO command in Poland, hoping for a larger NATO presence that could be used to plan and conduct joint military operations. And yeah, Will goes on to detail how provocative this would be if the U.S. would go on to take this stance. All right, this I wrote at antiwar.com on April 3rd, and it's about negotiations prior to the invasion. Zielinski rejected German security proposal before Russian invasion. I write, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky rejected a proposal from German Chancellor Olaf Scholz just days before the Russian invasion. The February 19th offer called on Kiev to renounce its NATO aspirations and declare neutrality. At the time, Zelensky rejected the security plan, saying Russian President Vladimir Putin could not be trusted to uphold the agreement. Under Berlin's plan, Putin and the American President Joe Biden would sign a deal to jointly guarantee Ukraine's security. The Wall Street Journal, which initially reported the proposal, said that Zelensky rejecting the offer left the German officials worried that the chances of peace were fading. The day after the meeting, French President Emmanuel Macron appealed to Biden in a call between world leaders to make another push for diplomacy. I think the last person who could still do something is you, Joe. Are you ready to meet Putin? Macron said to Biden. However, Washington appeared uninterested in a push for diplomacy in the days leading up to the invasion. While all the details of the German offer are unknown, it appears similar to a proposal Zelensky has outlined in recent weeks. Ukraine's top negotiator said Russia had verbally agreed to several of Kiev's positions on Sunday. Russian top negotiator said that the two sides are not close enough to an agreement for a meeting between Putin and Zelensky. And so it's unclear how exactly close they are to talks. Ukraine appears more optimistic than Russia, but this is, I think, still questionable. It could be more tactical. Russia, appearing indifferent, that they're not as committed to talks, could be seen as a way to have maybe a upper hand in talks or something like that. I'm not saying that that's necessarily the case. I'm just, that is a possibility. So, yep. Let's see. Dave DeCamp writing April 1st, U.S. allies unlikely to give Ukraine security guarantee it wants. And this was reported by CNN on Friday. On Tuesday, Ukraine put forward a draft peace deal to Russia. Under the proposal, Ukraine would renounce its plans to join NATO, but the Ukrainians want a security guarantee from the U.S. and other Western countries that are similar to NATO's Article 5, which states that in the event of an attack on one alliance member, it's an attack on all. The U.S. and NATO allies have been clear they don't want to fight Russia for Ukraine, so it's unlikely they would agree to what is essentially a mutual defense treaty. More importantly, there is little chance Russia would ever go for such an agreement, since it's one of its primary motives for invading Ukraine. And so this is, I think, very significant. Now, I'm not sure if we could completely rule out that Russia wouldn't be interested in this if it got agreements to demilitarize Ukraine and then to NATO weapon shipments into Ukraine. Maybe they would have some interest in this, especially since these countries don't seem to want to defend Ukraine anyways. But more significantly, you actually do have to get these countries to sign the mutual defense pact, which seems extremely unlikely. Now, there is still some ongoing issues between NATO member states, and Polish Prime Minister slams France's Macron for talking with Putin. This from Dave DeCamp on April 4th. On Monday, Polish Prime Minister slammed French President Emmanuel Macron for speaking with Russian President Vladimir Putin amid the fighting in Ukraine. And this, I think, is a good bit of comparison on how the Western countries are handling this and what the political splits are, where France and Germany have appeared far more willing to go along with trying to negotiate in diplomacy, where it's the Eastern European states and the Anglo states that are very hawkish and seem to want this war to go on for as long as possible. All right, so we have an update on what happened with the Russian demand for foreign hostile countries to pay for Russian natural gas, which would include, Western countries, in rubles. And as I was kind of speculating on the show and I thought was a possibility, a middle ground seems to have been worked out here, where Russia could still claim that they were paid in rubles, but everybody could still pay the Russian company in dollars. And so what's going to happen is Gazprom, the Russian gas company, is going to accept foreign currencies like dollars, right? And then they're going to convert that there into rubles and then pay for the gas with that. And so it seems like maybe Russia made a concession there, but we'll have to see how this plays out. And, even the short term here, a couple more weeks, things could change pretty rapidly. But it seems so far that no major changes to the way that oil is going to be exchanged on the market. Nothing if there's talks, I know Saudi Arabia talked about pricing their gas, their oil in yuan and things like that. Those things are all possible. I'm just saying that this seems to be maybe a little bit of a step back from that. So last two articles here from Dave DeCamp, and they are very important. U.S. weapons makers see longer-term benefits of war in Ukraine. And he writes, U.S. defense contractors are expected to make long-term profits from the war in Ukraine, as they will directly benefit from the Pentagon sending weapons into the conflict and the U.S. European allies increasing military spending. Since Russia has invaded Ukraine on February 24th, the U.S. has pledged over $1 billion in new military aid for Ukraine. The U.S. has also been pulling weapons from its own stocks to send to Ukraine, and the arms are replenished. The profits for the U.S. weapons makers are expected to soar. The main weapons being sent to Ukraine are Javelin anti-tank missiles and Stinger anti-aircraft missiles. The Javelins are a joint venture by Raytheon and Lockheed Martin, while Stingers are produced solely by Raytheon. Before taking his post as Pentagon chief, Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin was on the board of Raytheon. According to AFP, Raytheon Stinger missiles were no longer being produced until the Pentagon ordered 340 million of them last summer. $340 million worth of them. Excuse me, not 340 million. That's just the dollars worth. Now, the U.S. and its allies who are spending on the Stingers into Ukraine are looking for more. A recent spending bill signed by President Biden includes $3.5 billion for replenishing the U.S. arms sent to Ukraine. If 1,000 Stingers and 1,000 Javelins get shipped to Eastern Europe each month for the next year, which is not unlikely given the current pace, in our view, we think it could equate to $1 billion to $2 billion in revenue for both program manufacturers, which is material. And so they are going to make out like bandits on all that. The people who are profiting from the Ukrainian blood are the American weapons makers. All right, last story here from Dave DeCamp. Congress expected to increase Biden's $813 billion military budget, and that's just for 1 year. This from April 4th at antiwar.com by Dave DeCamp. For the 2023 fiscal year, President Joe Biden requested a massive $813 billion for the Pentagon, total military budget. That includes Pentagon, Department of Energy, and a couple other things. Republicans are largely united in their calls for more military spending than Biden wants. Republican hawks want the lawmakers to take inflation into account on top of real growth, and inflation last month was about 8%. Enough Democrats are on board with the idea of giving Biden more money than he asked for. Congress is expected to vote in favor of boosting the budget. Rep. Elaine Loria, the vice chair of the House Armed Services Committee, complained about Biden's proposed military budget on Twitter, saying that it sucks. And of course, it's not too high; it's too low. So that's right. The weapons makers are going to keep taking all of our tax dollars, and Ukrainians will pay for it in blood. All right, that's where I'm wrapping up the show for today, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in. And just want to remind people one last time, head on over to the libertarianinstitute.org/donate and help us meet our goal in our spring fundraiser. Thanks, everyone.